Warhammer 40,000. It's big as our entire galaxy, and then a little bit more with the Tyranids. And with that space is room for all kinds of interesting factions and more to interact with. Our overlords at Games Workshop have done an adequate job of showing this off. Some factions are expanded out to hell and back, some could certainly use some more oomph, and some are the Leagues of Zoltan. Some people complain that the setting already feels too full for more factions, in spite of the fact the Milky Way has been estimated to have between 100 billion and several trillion planets in it, because some people hear the words new faction as longer delay between marine releases. But enough complaining, for this video is not going to be about any gripes I or people in general have with the setting. That'd require far too much brain power. Instead, today's topic is more unga bunga. Everyone likes cool weapons, and if there's one thing that the factions of 40k all have in spades, it's cool weapons. Some of them are low-key, at least in terms of how many casualties they can cause at once, because even if they're instantly deadly, you can only kill one dude at a time with them. Others are completely insane, destroying entire cities, if not planets at once, with gruesome methods. And being a man who can count as one of his favorite movies Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, I like things that go boom no matter how stupid they are. And sometimes it's nice to have a feel-good video where I'm not thinking about critiquing the subject to any degree. So today, we talk weapons. Big ones, small ones, fancy ones, simple ones. As long as you can use it to destroy someone else, you'll be in for a good time. But before we begin, tell me something. Do you eat food? I have to assume you do, and that you aren't in fact a plant, in which case have I got something for you. Factor, the sponsor of this video. Factor is the premier meal delivery service that sends you delicious, dietitian-approved, and chef-crafted meals right to your front door. Stop me if this sounds familiar. You've had a long day at work, and when you get home, you're just too tired to cook. Well, good thing Factor heats up in just 2 minutes. Pop it in the microwave, set the timer to 2 minutes, and bam! Instant quality meal. It's just as quick as fast food, and even cheaper. You ever go out for a quick bite thinking it won't be too bad, and then spend $30 on a burger, small fries, and a drink? I have. It sucks. None of that nonsense here with Factor. Here you can see me eating this Factor meal in the dead of night, which is yet another positive for Factor. If you have the sleep schedule of a vampire, it's perfect for a late night meal instead of fast food. And there's no hassle whatsoever. No prep, no cleaning up the prep, no cleaning up after the fact. Just throw the box out. That is the only thing you have to do after a delicious Factor meal. And if you want more than just meals, that's fine too. They have some small bites for those who want a quick snack, and I really like their juices. They're a nice pick-me-up, they're refreshing, and I cannot stress this enough, they're healthy. And just as the cherry on top, here's the deal. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50pancreas to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50pancreas at Factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Good eating is important for everyone, so get yourself some Factor today and treat yourself right. Now then, let's get creative with our war crime tools. I do apologize for the voice, I am rather ill. I think that any video about 40k weapons as a whole should start with Old Reliable, the Bolter. Be honest, there's a pretty decent chance this weapon is what got you into Warhammer. You heard about 40k, asked someone what it was all about, and they told you that the basic weapon of one of the factions was a rocket launcher assault rifle. In spite of being a weapon invented by Big E himself, the Bolter originally wasn't intended to be the mainstay weapons of the Space Marine Legions. That honor went to Volkite weapons at first, but two major flaws made them unsustainable for that purpose. The lesser one was that at longer ranges, Volkite weapons lose some of their effectiveness. Because Space Marines were using the weapons, this isn't a huge issue, since they can cross a room in a blink and tank most shots they take on the way, but it is still a flaw with the weapon. Bolters can throw their shells far farther, making them infinitely more versatile, if a bit less powerful. The other far more pressing matter was that of industry. Volkite weapons, even during the days of the Great Crusade, before 10,000 years of degradation hit the Imperium, were far too expensive to continually produce en masse. Sure, an entire army of Space Marines armed with Volkite weapons is gonna wreck shop, no questions asked. But for the same cost and time investment, you can arm like 5 legions of Space Marines with bolters that'll be as effective against most things they're expected to face. A human colony that's regressed back to the Stone Age is going to fight back equally poorly against Volkite weapons and bolters alike. Why bother with the extra cost? In spite of being the fallback option, don't think bolters were chosen with reluctance or some sad shit like that. Rocket launcher assault rifle. Bolters would become an exceptional weapon, and as the Imperium progressed on, would become an almost sacred item. While it is just a tool, it's a tool I would say has 3 primary figures using it, all of whom are figures that inspire awe and fear in the average person, and 2 of which are outright holy in nature. The Space Marines and Sisters of Battle are the Emperor's angels and his most fervent worshippers, respectively. Guard commanders may complain about Sisters of Battle running headfirst into firefights, as Caiaphas Cain has bitched about on multiple occasions, weapons, but they're so fervent in his worship they bring about miracles. And Space Marines are just outright angels to the average Imperial. And for the third figure that uses them, Commissars may not be holy, but they sure as hell inspire fear in the average Guardsman. Between these figures, the bolt gun has become a symbol of the Imperium's might and divinity among the average Guardsman, because anyone using one of those things is either related to the Divine, or a scarier figure than the Hive Tyrant rushing you down. The bolts these weapons fire are roughly 75 in caliber, and are designed to pierce through an enemy and then blow up. It's important to note that while they did turn out to be pretty effective against enemies in power armor, remember that they're strength 4 on the tabletop. They weren't, strictly speaking, designed for combating heavily armored enemies. A whole lot of the Great Crusade was against normal human civilizations, remember, because the only person who could lead mankind was the god who was in intense denial about fundamental aspects of reality, so anyone who was against him had to go. But you know how that ends. Great Crusade, Marine versus Marine. Turns out, hey, bolt guns have some damn good punch even against tougher foes like your fellow Astartes. For the variety of ammunitions and types of bolt gun there are, I'm going to commit the biggest lore sin there is and say just go read the wiki. Yes, I know the wiki is full of errors and only getting your lore from the wiki is bad, but for the exact types of bolt guns that exist, it's fine enough. It's dry stuff going through the differences between every single weapon that can be considered a bolter, so if you're that interested in the differences between the rocket gun that's a sniper and the rocket gun that's an SMG, go to the funny Lexicanum page or something. I promise I won't tell anyone you did. And hey, if you'd like advice from someone certified to teach on how to use Wikipedia properly, scroll to the bottom for the sources cited. Then go read those instead of just the wiki. Bolt guns really are the symbol of 40k's weapons in a lot of ways though. They're versatile, they come in all sorts of flavors, and they're heavy-hitting weapons carried by the setting's poster boys. If you don't think they're awesome, then I think you need to find another setting to enjoy. Now let's swivel on over to the opposite end of the destructive spectrum. Exterminatus is a big thing. You might start tuning out what it entails because planetary destruction is pretty common in 40k, but there's a reason the Death Star is so goddamn influential. One moment there's a planet, the next there isn't. Even if the actual planet is still there, no one on it is living to tell the tale. And my favorite one of those weapons is easily the virus bomb. Virus bombs are exactly what you think they are. Filled with a pathogen called the Life Eater virus, they're dropped onto planets slated for extermination. When they detonate, they do so rather high up in the planet's atmosphere, because the stuff inside of them needs to spread. Under the right conditions, the virus can spread across the entire planet within moments. Once it's out there, anything that comes in contact with the virus is dead. The minimum level of protection you require to survive one of these things is dreadnought armor, and even then, the slightest of cracks is going to cause it to seep in. When it does, it turns you into sludge. You just straight up melt, the virus decomposing you within moments. In the best case scenario, where the winds of the planet pick the virus up and spread it across the world, a particularly lush planet can be rendered to its component parts in mere minutes. But the fun doesn't stop there. Oh no, no, no. A side effect of the Life Eater virus is that a massive amount of gases are released into the atmosphere from the decomposition, the most prominent of which is methane. If you've ever seen a video of some absolute paragon of humanity farting into a lighter, you know that methane is a highly flammable gas. And with all that methane and other flammable gases released into the atmosphere at once, because remember it's all biological matter, including forests and whatnot, a single spark can turn the entire thing into hell. Oftentimes done intentionally, but not necessarily so, a planet that's fallen victim to biological warfare of this type can also fall victim to being burned up in its entirety. These worlds within minutes are then left as dead worlds, being nothing but empty balls of rock floating in space. Ironically enough, this happening is probably the best case scenario for the use of a virus bomb, because the fire consumes the virus as well, and the Imperium can then mine whatever minerals the planets might have had on it with little fear. Virus bombs are the coolest method of exterminatus to me because they're so gruesome. An entire planet of living things turned into sludge near instantaneously. Usually we think of planetary destruction as the whole thing just going boom. Again, see the Death Star. But while these are quick, they're incredibly brutal, a far more graphic and disturbing implementation of planetary destruction. Another reason I like them is that they're fairly versatile. During Armageddon, the planetary governor, who as an aside was an incompetent traitor to the Imperium who ended up siding with the Orks of all people, deployed several of them against the invading Orks, and presumably did not intend to destroy the planet, him being on it and all that. And in Space Marine 2, the tutorial mission is Titus launching a virus bomb into the atmosphere of the planet he's on, and there's a whole game after that level, so clearly these things have varying levels of pay grade. Of course, you should also know they're my favorite Exterminatus weapon, because they can go oh so very, very wrong wrong. We'll work up the list of reasons from least to most worrying. The first issue is that they can degrade. While a virus's status as properly living is debatable, it's alive enough that it can decay and die and all that stuff living beings do, especially if stored improperly. So when the governor of Armageddon launched his virus bombs, every orc on Armageddon didn't just melt. They have an expiration date. A very long-lasting one, but one to stick to nonetheless. Another problem they have is that of storage and moving them. If you're next to a nuclear weapon and start smacking it with a wrench, nothing is going to happen beyond making people nervous because you're smacking a nuke with a wrench. There's certain things that need to happen for a nuke to go off, and just headbutting it isn't one of them. But a virus bomb is at the end of the day just something that stores a highly lethal virus. If you store it wrong, or a seal breaks, or any number of things happens, you and everyone else around you are turning into slurry. Further up the chain of problems is that this is a weapon that in part relies upon wind patterns in the atmosphere to spread, especially at the lower levels of destruction like the ones used on Armageddon. And as some very unfortunate troops in World War I found out, the wind doesn't only blow in the direction of your enemy. Again on Armageddon, the virus bombs deployed had some of their payload blown back onto the guardsmen defending the world, which despite their degraded status, killed them. Using these things requires the utmost of care and planning, because the Life Eater virus doesn't discriminate in who it devours. And the final problem with them is something you might have figured out from their name alone. Turns out weaponizing a virus makes Nurgle real happy and gives him a bit of a power boost. So for all those reasons, virus bombs have largely been retired from service in favor of things like cyclonic torpedoes, though they are still kept around and used for when there's no other option. And I gotta imagine there's still some decent cases for their use. Even though space has no atmosphere, launching one into a Tyranid bioship would kill it quickly, and while yes, Nurgle would still get a bit of a jump, that's an arguably fair trade. Nurgle getting nebulously more powerful is probably a better result than the Tyranids going on to eat an entire sector because he didn't want to use the weapon. Some weapons, however, are both large and small in scale. They may only be aimed at one or a few people at a time, but they also mess with fundamental properties of the universe itself, which has to count for something. Enter Grav Weapons. Grav is short for graviton, which for those of us not in 40k land who makes everything sound Latin, means gravity. Now for those of you who didn't pay too much attention in physics class, everything in the universe has gravity. If you are made of atoms, which you are, you have gravity. It's just that things like the sun and of course the earth have far larger gravitational pulls than you do, which is why you can't force pull objects to and around you. It's a shame that's not the case, and also a shame that bastard Isaac Newton invented it and stopped us from flying around everywhere, but what are you gonna do? Regardless, you still have some gravity. And graviton weapons point at you, fire a funky little beam, and change gravity. This can actually be made to make you lighter, but the main usage of them is of course making you heavier. In space this is perhaps best shown, because in a zero-gravity environment, suddenly increasing gravity by a couple dozen-fold means you're in for all sorts of lovely structural failures. But even on the ground where gravity is there naturally, it's still a phenomenal way to reduce people to stains on the ground. Bones suddenly having the equivalent of 100 Gs thrust upon them can shatter even space marines, and against vehicles, frames and internal workings collapse without setting off any explosions as gravity pulls them down. They're one of the most destructive weapons around in my estimation, because gravity isn't something you can just ignore. I'm sorry for comparing it to TikTok slop, but it reminds me of those videos where a car is going off a ramp with varying levels of gravity in play. Even if you don't instantly collapse, the slightest movement is throwing your balance off, and then suddenly you're now forced to the ground, your own weight keeping you from standing up. Now it's usually a far quicker fate than that as you're just smeared to the earth, but I like to imagine there's a lower setting that's something closer to a Dragon Ball Z gravity training room. As an aside to wrap us off here, I know I'm heavily biased in favor of Halo in most things. I am absolutely sure I've given it the benefit of the doubt to extreme levels. See the 4 videos I made comparing it quite favorably to 40k. But listen, you cannot tell me that the Graviton Crusher isn't just a gravity hammer with the serial number filed off. You know damn well this wasn't just GW expounding on the idea of grav weapons to include some more melee options. This came about because someone at GW was replaying Halo 3 and got nostalgic. And you know what? Good on them. I'm glad they ripped off Halo for this bad boy. Gravity hammers kick ass. Now we've been talking about the Imperium's weapons this whole time, and make no mistake, there are several other awesome ones they have. Vortex grenades are a portable portal to hell. Not a terribly long-lasting one, but lengthy enough in their effects to drag something into the afterlife with them. But there's plenty of other factions with cool weapons. All of them do, in fact. So let's take a look at some other factions' weapons now, starting with, of course, the Eldar. Wraith Cannons are a very fun combo of Vortex and Grav weapons. To start small, it rips open a portal to the Warp as well as causing intense gravitational forces, so whatever gets thrown to Slaanesh isn't even in one piece anymore. But Wraithguard have another weapon that's much more fun in my opinion, the D-Scythe. What it does is rips the target's soul from their very body. How exactly this works against people like Blanks or the Necrons, I'm not sure, but regardless, that is a terrifying weapon made even more so by the fact that this isn't even some sort of super weapon. Eldar heavy infantry make use of it. And worst of all is that it doesn't even give any indication the weapon was fired. There's no visible muzzle flash or trail of ethereal plasma. The guy next to you just turns off. The Dark Eldar weapons, meanwhile, are an entire mess of creative atrocities, so why don't we just speedrun some of their gadgets? Have you ever wanted a sword that's also a whip? Say hello to the Razor Flails. It's a sword, it's a whip. It can show those primitive space marines that think they're hot shit that you cannot out-dexterity build a Dark Eldar. Who can forget the reliable splinter rifle of basic Kabalite warriors? It fires crystals at you, which is, fairly reasonable, but it also shreds them into shards on their way to you, and they're also a highly potent neurotoxin, because why not poison you while they shoot you? But those are all pretty boring so far. I mean, a sword that's a whip and a poison gun? Far too mundane. Well, how about the flesh gauntlet that homunculi use? You know how your body grows slowly? I mean, yeah, puberty results in some people going from like 3.5 feet tall to 6'4" in a matter of months, or alternatively in my case go from 5'2" to 5'7", but that's still months of time for your body to grow. Well, the flesh gauntlet causes rampant muscle growth in moments. Instead of turning you into soup, this thing turns into a pile of twitching, writhing muscles that are still almost certainly feeling pain. What fun! But the best Eldar weapon is easily the Harlequin's Kiss. As you may have noticed, I have a particular soft spot in my heart for weapons that turn people into things that don't resemble people, and the Harlequin's Kiss is my favorite of all of them. Within this wrist-mounted Harlequin weapon is 100 meters of coiled wire waiting to spring. Remember, Eldar use monofilament weapons, so they can fit a whole lot in a tight space. That's what she said. Once the coil is unleashed, it springs forward and can pierce even heavier power armor. And if it pierces flesh rather than just dicing you up, that's when the fun truly begins, because the wire starts wrapping around the insides of the person they're shot into and squeezing real hard. Because they're monofilament, they can wrap around things even as small as your veins, and potentially even single cells. It's space elf technology after all, it can be real small if it wants to be. Whatever it looks like ultimately, there's no surviving that. But here's why it's my favorite, right? The wire is so thin that the entry wound is no doubt incredibly small, and because of how the weapon works, everything in your body except for your skin and hair is suddenly liquefied. So logically speaking, with such a small entry wound, surely anyone this thing pierces is turned into a pressure hose of people juice. And if you really want to get especially gruesome, the entry point might not even be large enough to bleed from. So instead of a fire hose of people fluid, you might just get a human being that's been turned into a waterbed. Imagine that. A truly fitting weapon for a Harlequin. Imagine how shocked a guardsman would be when they go to see if their friend needs medical attention after combat's ended, only to find out they have the same consistency as a water balloon. Classic Eldar prank. But if we're discussing weapons, we can hardly ignore Necron weapons, and as a whole, I just like Gauss weapons. They're not quite the Gauss Warthog, but close enough. Much like gravity, everything in the universe technically has a magnetic field. Again, certain things have far stronger ones, which is why you don't get permanently stuck to your fridge when it's time for a snack, but we all have one. Necron Gauss weapons have them do something along the lines of making magnetic fields, or messing with them, or some other ungodly science fantasy speak involving magnets. What ends up happening is that the atoms and molecules that make up whatever they're pointed at are actually pulled towards the target one layer at a time. Now, in theory, this could be one hell of a skincare routine. I mean, think about it, right? The top layers of your skin are all dead skin. Imagine how clear your pores would be. But the Necrons tend to not stop at just your outer skin, and instead use it at a rather higher power setting than what that would entail, which leads to you being ripped apart layer by layer over an incredibly fast period of time. It hurts like hell, but as a small mercy for a 40k weapon, it is over pretty quickly for you. A lot of different Necron weapons are Gauss weapons of varying levels of power, ranging from anti-infantry to anti-ship weaponry. The Imperium has tried on multiple occasions to figure these things out, since technically being scientific in nature, they could theoretically reverse engineer Necron tech. It has not gone terribly well for the most part, because the Necrons are so far above the Imperium it'd be like giving a gorilla a firearm and telling him to make more of it. The gorilla doesn't know the physics and mechanics that go into making firearms, it's a fucking gorilla, dude. Moving on, while I do have to admit that Tyranid weapons don't speak to me as much as other factions' weaponry, I do like that they're all alive in and of themselves. Symbiotically connected to the bioform wielding them, every Tyranid weapon is a living creature that assists in the consumption of a world. It makes the Tyranids feel that much more alien that any weapon beyond their claws is also another living creature. Beyond that, special shout out to the standard flesh borer that Termagants use because of how many layers of disgusting life are involved here. Obviously the Termagant using it is alive, but because their weapons are alive, the flesh borer itself is also a living thing. And what they fire are borer beetles, which upon reaching their target begin rapidly feasting on it. Getting shot by Tyranids doesn't mean you've just been shot, it also means you're going to be eaten alive. Also, yo dog, I heard you like bugs, so I put bugs in your bug so you can bug while you bug. I feel old. Ork weapons, meanwhile, are in a weird spot to me. On the one hand, the general concept of the orc approach to firearms is something anyone can appreciate. Why use a small gun when you can use a bigger gun? Why use a bigger gun when you can use a bigger gun with 3 extra barrels welded onto it? Why aim good when you can fire more bullets than there are grains of sand on a beach? But as a consequence, their average weapons are only so interesting to me to talk about. There are only so many ways one can say that this gun is a big gun that shoots a lot. That's why I like my soup weapons. You can get a lot of mileage out of the different ways to turn people into sludge. I've been reading too much Dark Elf stuff lately, I gotta get away from the people's soup. But there is one weapon that stands out to me more than any other, both for the sheer fun factor of it as well as the fact that on the tabletop it nearly sent me into a fit of rage. The shock attack gun. Its ammunition is closer to something a Tyranid would use because it doesn't fire bullets, it fires snotlings. How it works is some big mech who is more creatively insane than most orcs makes what is essentially a mini warp portal gun. It creates a small corridor through the warp with the entry point being the gun and the exit point being whatever it's fired at. The snotling is fired and then goes through the portal and comes out the other side. And from the moment it fires through the first end of the portal, the fun has begun. Warp travel, as you may know, is an absolute mess. Even with Geller fields and the faith of the Imperium of Man in play to counteract the warp, sometimes demons just happen. It's just an occurrence. Now consider that this is just a raw dog portal through the warp with no protection, no safety measures, not so much as a good luck to the poor snotling who's technically going through FTL travel right now without a ship or spacesuit. Naturally, the snotling is not going to have a very good time. In fact, I feel quite comfortable in saying that the snotling is going to have a bad time. Very best case scenario, it comes out scared for its life, and that's assuming that it spent as much time in the warp as is perceived in real space. After all, sometimes what only lasts the second for us is tens of thousands of years in the warp. So the snotling might come out absolutely insane and feral. I mean, hell, it doesn't really reflect on the tabletop, but it might come out as a chaos spawn. Or it just might not come out at all, in which case it's time to load up another snotling and try again. The end result when the snotling finally comes out one way or another is it throwing hands with whatever it jumps on top of. Sometimes it comes out right on top of you and starts clawing at your face, which while yeah, for a space marine is manageable, the average person is probably gonna die. Sometimes it comes back out inside a vehicle, in which case the crew of a Lehman Russ get a very uninvited guess. And if the Big Mech is lucky, it comes back into real space inside of you and you get telefragged. You and the snotling blow up because your atoms are in the same space at the same time, and that's not supposed to happen. It's just such a fun weapon. Everything else is ancient weapons using technology long forgotten, or mystical weapons that are equal parts magic and tech, and then the orcs just go, whoa, snotling be upon ye, and now you have to deal with it. Sometimes demons come out. It's a portal to the warp, of course demons happen sometimes. One of the better case scenarios for someone this weapon is fired at is being covered in snotling guts because it fell apart in the transition back to real space. Sure, that's not deadly, but it's certainly unpleasant. As for why they use snotlings, the answer is kinda funny. The average orc just doesn't want to do it. It's a level of insanity even they aren't down with, because while sure they love themselves some unprotected warp travel, it's with the understanding that they're with their boys on a ship fighting together, not just one random boy diving into hell through a makeshift portal gun. Most grots, meanwhile, are too clever to get caught. They see the Big Mech with a shock attack gun and proceed to be literally anywhere else but near that guy. Snotlings, however, are dumb, stupid, dim-witted morons. They just get rounded up and fired into the warp because of it. It's almost like firing a puppy into hell. Sure, it doesn't always work. The weapon might self-destruct and kill everything within a block radius, including the Big Mech, and one time an orc runt herd named Zodgrob shoved the Big Mech into his own gun because he actually liked his snotling charges. But whatever happens, it'll at least be funny. As for why I hate it on the tabletop, it's because of the reason for almost every faction I've made a video about them sucking, minus the Space Wolves. It kicked my ass in a game. Everything hit by a shock attack gun has to take a battle shock test. Not wounded, just hit. Anything from a guardsman squad to, more pressingly, Kane, the god of war, who is a warp god. So when the Goominator and his big mech goober fired a shock attack gun at the avatar of Kane I was using, I botched my battle shock test because of course I do. And despite being a god of war, Kane can no longer grab the objective I needed him to because a funny green goblin creature startled him, like a raccoon jumping out of a garbage can or something. I also like the Teleporta Blast as well, because teleportation is usually something you do to yourself willingly. You're at X spot, so you teleport to Y spot. With the Teleporter Blasta, somebody else is teleporting you, and your consent is not a factor. Maybe you teleport an inch to the left, and that's about it. Maybe you teleport 1,000 feet into the air and fall to your death. Maybe you teleport inside the Space Marine next to you, and one of the Imperium's finest is taken out by a guardsman who was superimposed inside of him. And a final shout out to Snaz Guns for being the ultimate expression of Ork weaponry, because they just have whatever bolted onto them. Several barrels of projectiles, laser weapons, plasma weapons, grav weapons. If an Ork can afford it, he might jam it into a Snaz gun and then pull the trigger. Results may vary between firing a las pistol shot at a Lehman Russ and the Ork getting obliterated, or firing a Meltablast at a guardsman who gets Dr. Manhattaned in the dumbest way possible. Now, since there's only so many weapons that really stick out to me, we're gonna wrap up with Tau railguns. In the grand scheme of things, they aren't particularly interesting compared to the various ways to turn people into soup. But who doesn't love a good railgun? For all the shit you can give 343/Halo Studios for, adding a railgun weapon in 4 isn't on the list. The Gauss Warthog too, that thing was the most powerful vehicle in Halo in the right hands. And who can forget that a ship mountain railgun made an appearance in the greatest movie of all time, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, just in case you forgot I liked that movie because you repressed it. And Tau railguns are just really powerful railguns. Sometimes a weapon doesn't need to be that special to be lovable, and Tau railguns are certainly something to behold, even if they're not the most unique thing ever. The Tau have a rail rifle that's used by their Pathfinder teams. It's a strength 10, AP-4, damage 3 weapon, because yeah, let's give our scouts something that can one-shot Terminators. There is a damn good reason the Tau are still around despite their incredible numerical disadvantages. There are eventually even plans for the Tau to mass-produce these and have every soldier equipped with one, which of course won't happen for balance reasons, but it's cool to see that sort of thing considered in universe. One more thing that makes the Tau the grounded faction, that level of consideration for future plans and logistics. But of course, we all know the real star of the show with Tau railguns, the one mounted on the Hammerhead gunship. It's big, it's scary, it's presumably quite loud, and whatever it's pointed at is gonna feel the pain. Even Titans have to be wary around it, and your average armored vehicle is just done. These things apparently hit so hard and fast that when they hit a vehicle, they punch through it with such force that anyone inside of it who wasn't hit is still sucked out the exit hole as a bloody mess. Now come on, tell me that doesn't make you appreciate the Tau at least a little bit. And yeah, those are the weapons in 40k I think are pretty cool. That's kinda it. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the bolter to my 40k, something reliable and classic that gives this channel a little bit of special sauce. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Bolter, I hardly know her. Anyways, the ending bit I originally had planned was saying that and then just me screaming, but I know some people use my stuff mostly to sleep, and I thought that was both kinda rude and a great way to drive my audience away. Lacking anything better to do with this spot now, I think the Miku skin in Fortnite is pretty cool.